Blair will be questioned for 6 hours in the presence of not just the inquiry panel, but the families of service personnel who died in Iraq. Now, he's expected to insist the overall policy was still right. And earlier on GMTV, his former special advisor defended his case to go to war.
Saddam Hussein wouldn't let the inspectors in. Hans Blix said there were 10,000 litres of anthrax unaccounted for. If you haven't got these weapons and everyone else believes you have, the obvious thing would have been for Saddam to comply with the United Nations demand that he agrees the inspectors go in.
Let's chat now to Tahrir Swift, an Iraqi exile, and you were shaking your head viciously there at
right,
Tony Blair's former special advisor. Why is that?
Well, I mean, they say he wasn't complying. Actually, I mean, on the eve of the war, Saddam said, if you are worried about weapons of mass destruction, please enter Iraq peacefully. And I promise you to have an election supervised by the UN in 2 years' time. So what was wrong with this offer?
Some people find your support of Saddam Hussein, or maybe support isn't the right word, slightly strange, because if we just talk about your background, it's incredibly interesting. I mean, you had to flee Iraq back in 1979. Your family, your father and your brother were tortured by his men.
That's right.
And yet...
2 of my cousins were killed by us.
Which is a dreadful situation, and yet you did
there's
not
There's a difference
support...
between Saddam Hussein and Iraq.
Okay,
this is the problem I have sometimes with the media, is that they always say, we have to attack Saddam, we have to... I'm sorry, but the bomb that you're going to drop on us, it's not going to distinguish who is Saddam's supporter and who is not a Saddam supporter. I mean, Iraq is in ruins.
So how else...
Weapons of mass destruction were used on Iraq.
How else could they have got rid of Saddam Hussein, do you think?
Well, getting rid of Saddam Hussein should never be an issue on the table. It's illegal under international law. And if we look in the history of Europe, you know, the Spaniards, for a long time, had a despicable dictator called Franco. Nobody went and liberated them with bombs, depleted uranium and cluster bombs. Franco died and Spain moved on. The interference, Western interference in the Middle East is making things worse.
So despite your personal loss and the pain that your family went through, you would rather Saddam Hussein...
I don't want revenge.
Was still in power or die naturally? I mean, you just did not want Tony Blair and the West to get involved.
Because I want Iraqis to learn the lessons. You know, if we got rid of Saddam ourselves, then we would have rejected everything he stands for, all his values. Unfortunately, today, we have 30 Saddams, you know, warlords now, acting with impunity, you know, violating human rights.
So this is the current state of Iraq. I mean, I'm sure you've been back.
And if you want to read the Oxfam report, it's an appalling catalogue of what's happening. To actually think that Tony Blair was talking about the rights of the Iraqi people and getting rid of a hateful dictator. Okay. And look at the human rights situation today. It's absolutely disgusting.
Tony Blair is the man in the centre of attention today. He is the key witness. He's the guy who we've all been listening or waiting to listen to. Some people say he should be tried for war crimes. Would you agree with that?
I think about 52% of the British public agree with me. I think I'd agree with that with that view. He should be put. There should be consequences. But what Tony Blair has done is bad for international law, it's bad for the Middle East, it's bad for the Iraqi people, it's bad for the British public. And I am sure, because I'm a peace campaigner and I talk to my local people, everybody is very resentful in the way Mr. Blair has shown contempt towards the public opinion in this country.
It's fascinating to get a perspective from you as an Iraqi. We're going to talk to another lady now, Tahrir, but do stay where you are, because we'll talk now to Deirdre Glover, and she's got a very personal experience in the Iraq War as well. Hi, Deirdre. I can see you're there outside the QE2 centre with lots of protesters behind you. And of course, very tragically, your son Christian was killed while serving in Basra back in 2004. I mean, do you think Tony Blair is to blame for your son's death? Do you blame him personally?
Yes. I hold him personally to blame, yes. He made the decision against a lot of advice. Now people are coming out of the woodwork saying he was wrong, but he took the decision to send my son to an unjustified war, yes.
Thing is, Deirdre, he had his cabinet behind him. The House of Commons voted in favour of invading Iraq. So why do you blame him personally? He didn't do it on his own, some people would say.
No, but he had the information and he fed it incorrectly, I believe, to other people. Many people are now saying they didn't agree with it, but of course they agreed with him at the time. But he is responsible. He was the Prime Minister of the country and he had information which we did not have.
You have suffered so much, obviously, on a very personal level from losing your son in that war. And some would say that because of that, you would never support the outcome of the war, whatever happened, because of your personal tragedy. What would you say to that?
I'd say no. I said I went on a protest against the war because of the United Nations lack of sanctions. And even my son knew at the time that he was going into an unjustified conflict. But he was willing to serve his Queen and country, and did.
We know Tony Blair's a smooth operator. I mean, he's been in a situation like this some 3 times before. He's unlikely to say anything controversial, really, today. But in an ideal world, what would you like to hear from Tony Blair today?
I'd like to admit he was wrong, and I'd like him to apologise, which he won't. And
along with Tahrir, who's in our studio now, would you like to see him face a war crimes trial? I mean, it isn't a court today, but would you like to?
I gather he can't. I gather from law he can't face a war crimes trial, but he'll meet his maker at some point, although he's he thinks God's on his side. He is not.
And I understand you're going to try and meet Mr. Blair after he gives evidence, is that right?
We've asked to, but maybe he will, maybe he won't. I have no information.
OK, well, it's set to be a very, very fascinating day, whatever happens. Thanks so much for your time. Deirdre joining us there. Deirdre Glover, of course, lost her son in the Iraq War, and Tahrir Swift, an Iraqi exile. Thanks for your comments as well.
Just coming up to 8:20 this Friday morning. These are the news headlines that you're waking up to.